The sterile, recycled air of the international terminal always did something to me. It was a potent cocktail of jet fuel, stale coffee, and the faint metallic tang of anxiety. Usually, I navigated it with the practiced detachment of a seasoned traveler, a ghost gliding through the liminal spaces between destinations. Tonight, however, the air felt charged, buzzing with a different kind of energy, one that had nothing to do with delayed flights or time zone shifts. It was the hum of an unexpected electric connection. My flight to Barcelona had been canceled, then rescheduled for a torturous 24 hours later. A cruel twist of fate for someone who'd been meticulously planning this solo adventure for months, a desperate escape from the suffocating familiarity of my life back home. So, there I was, perched on an uncomfortable, faux leather chair in the decidedly unglamorous airport lounge, nursing a lukewarm glass of Chardonnay and scrolling through endless travel blogs, trying to conjure some semblance of excitement. The only thing truly holding my attention was the rhythmic tap-tap-tapping of someone's fingers on a laptop nearby. He was engrossed, his brow furrowed in concentration, a stray lock of dark hair falling across his forehead. The low murmur of airport announcements and the distant rumble of luggage carts created a percussive backdrop to his focused stillness. I'd stolen glances before, intrigued by the quiet intensity radiating from him. He wasn't the usual airport lounge denizen, no harried business exec glued to his phone, no frantic parent wrangling children. He possessed a certain understated elegance, a quiet confidence that drew the eye. My own circumstances felt rather pathetic. My meticulously packed suitcase sat beside me, a monument to my thwarted plans. My work emails, a constant buzzing reminder of the life I was trying to outrun, felt particularly obnoxious tonight. I'd half-heartedly tried to catch up, but the flickering fluorescent lights and the pervasive sense of transience made concentration impossible. Then he looked up. Our eyes met, and the world, for a fleeting moment, seemed to sharpen. His were a startling shade of hazel, flecked with gold, and they held a depth that was both unnerving and captivating. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a subtle acknowledgement of our shared predicament, our mutual observation. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice a low, resonant baritone that cut through the ambient noise with surprising clarity. I felt a blush creep up my neck. "You could say that. Barcelona's apparently decided it doesn't want me tonight." He chuckled, a rich, warm sound. "Mine's supposed to be heading to Tokyo. Seems the universe has a sense of humor." He gestured to the empty seat beside me. "Mind if I join you in our shared purgatory?" "Please," I said, my voice a little breathier than I intended. "Misery loves company, right?" He introduced himself as Liam, and the conversation flowed with an ease that was both intoxicating and disarming. We talked about our canceled flights, our travel destinations, and then, as the hours bled into the pre-dawn gloom, we found ourselves sharing more. He spoke of his work as an architect, his passion for restoring old buildings, the quiet satisfaction he found in breathing new life into forgotten spaces. I, in turn, confessed my own stifled dreams of opening a small bookstore, a sanctuary of ink and paper, a stark contrast to my current corporate grind. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a recognition of kindred spirits adrift in the vast, impersonal landscape of the airport. The shared vulnerability of our situation seemed to strip away the usual pretenses, allowing for a raw, honest exchange. We laughed, we commiserated, and as the first hints of dawn began to paint the sky outside the tinted windows, a different kind of tension began to build. It wasn't just the shared disappointment of canceled flights anymore. It was the electric current that sparked between us whenever our hands brushed. The lingering gaze, the way our voices softened when we spoke each other's names. The lounge, once a symbol of my frustration, had transformed into a strangely intimate space, cocooned by the sleeping travelers and the hum of distant engines. We found ourselves sharing a bottle of wine, then another, the conversations growing more personal, more intimate. He spoke of a recent heartbreak, a relationship that had crumbled under the weight of unspoken expectations. I, in turn, admitted to a lingering loneliness, a feeling of being adrift in my own life. The words tumbled out, unbidden, unedited, fueled by the potent combination of exhaustion, alcohol, and an undeniable attraction. By the time our rescheduled flights were finally announced, the sky was a bruised purple, and the air in the lounge felt thick with unspoken possibilities. We stood, a little unsteady on our feet, the awkwardness of the impending separation hanging heavy between us. "So," Liam said, his hazel eyes searching mine, a hint of something more than just friendly curiosity in their depths. This was unexpected. "Very," I agreed, my heart performing a frantic flamenco against my ribs. He hesitated for a moment, then reached out and gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His touch sent a jolt through me, a tremor that vibrated down to my toes. "I don't want this to be just a canceled flight story." My breath hitched. "Me neither," I whispered. And then, in the sterile, fluorescent-lit embrace of the airport lounge, under the watchful, indifferent eyes of 1,000 strangers, we kissed. It was a kiss born of shared vulnerability, of unexpected connection, of a primal, undeniable pull. It was hungry, desperate, and utterly, completely consuming. The outside world ceased to exist. There was only the taste of wine, the warmth of his lips, and the dizzying sensation of falling, not from a plane, but into something entirely new. We didn't make it onto our respective flights. Instead, we found ourselves in a discreet hotel room not far from the airport, the world outside fading into a blur of neon lights and the distant wail of sirens. The night that followed was a whirlwind of passion, a feverish exploration of each other's bodies and souls. We talked until the sun rose, sharing secrets and desires we hadn't dared to voice before. It was a night of pure, unadulterated connection, a stolen moment outside the confines of our ordinary lives. By morning, the reality of our separate lives loomed large. We exchanged numbers, promises of staying in touch, but the unspoken question hung in the air. What now? The airport lounge connection, as intoxicating as it was a fleeting moment. We lived in different cities, had different lives. "I'll call you," he'd said, his voice husky with a mixture of regret and something else, something I couldn't quite decipher. "I hope you do," I'd replied, the words feeling inadequate, a pale echo of the whirlwind of emotions swirling within me. I never expected to see him again. It was a beautiful, unforgettable night, a story I'd tell myself in quiet moments, a reminder that sometimes the unexpected can be extraordinary. But life, as it often does, had a different plan. A plan that would soon involve a sternly worded letter, a potential eviction, and the reappearance of the man from the airport lounge, not as a fleeting memory, but as my new landlord. The universe, it seemed, truly did have a sense of humor. The polished brass plaque affixed to the heavy oak door read, simply, "Willow Creek Properties. My new landlord, my new landlord." The words echoed in my mind, a percussive beat against the otherwise quiet hum of the hallway. I fumbled with the keys Liam had given me earlier that morning, the cool metal a stark contrast to the sudden heat prickling my skin. It had been a whirlwind of paperwork, a blur of signing away my deposit and first month's rent, all under the watchful, yet somehow detached, gaze of the building's manager. He'd been efficient, almost surgically so, his answers to my questions brief and to the point. I'd tried to glean some information, some hint, some reason for Liam's presence here, but he'd offered nothing. Just a curt nod and a "Mr. Hayes prefers to handle tenant relations directly." Mr. Hayes. Liam. The man who'd tasted like jet fuel and desperation, whose hands had traced the curve of my spine with a desperate urgency that had mirrored my own. The man I'd shared a hotel room with, a room that had felt like a sanctuary carved out of the chaotic liminal space of delayed flights and lost connections. Now, he was the architect of my new living situation, the gatekeeper to my decidedly unglamorous apartment in a city I'd only chosen out of sheer, unadulterated panic. My flight to Barcelona had been canceled, his to Tokyo. A potent cocktail of circumstances had thrown us together in that sterile, recycled air of the international terminal, a potent cocktail that had somehow brewed into a feverish, all-consuming night. We'd been strangers, then kindred spirits, then lovers, all within the span of 12 torturous hours. We'd exchanged numbers, whispered promises of maybe someday, and then we'd parted, the harsh morning light bleeding away the intoxicating haze of our shared intimacy. I'd assumed that was it. A beautiful, fleeting, airport-induced fantasy. And then, 2 weeks later, here I was, signing a lease for an apartment in a building owned by him. The key turned with a satisfying click. I pushed the door open, and the scent of lemon polish and something faintly floral, lavender perhaps, greeted me. It was a clean smell, a neutral smell, a smell that spoke of meticulous upkeep. My old apartment had smelled perpetually of stale coffee and the faint, lingering scent of my cat's hair. This was different. The apartment itself was a study in understated elegance. High ceilings, hardwood floors that gleamed under the soft ambient light, and large windows that promised an abundance of natural light. The living room was sparsely furnished, hinting at a recent renovation, or perhaps just a minimalist aesthetic. A plush, dove-gray sofa sat against one wall, a sleek coffee table in front of it. The kitchen was compact but modern, with stainless steel appliances and granite countertops. It was undeniably appealing, a stark contrast to the cramped, dingy box I'd been living in for the past 3 years. But my eyes kept drifting to the framed architectural sketches leaning against one wall, waiting to be hung. Intricate, detailed drawings of buildings, some modern and soaring, others older, lovingly restored. Liam, the architect. It made sense, of course, but seeing his work, his tangible creations, here in his property, felt like another layer of intrusion, another reminder of the man who had so effortlessly, so unexpectedly, woven himself into the fabric of my life. I walked through the apartment, my footsteps soft on the polished wood. The bedroom was equally serene, a king-sized bed with crisp white linens dominating the space. A small balcony overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street. It was everything I'd dreamed of, a sanctuary that felt a million miles away from the suffocating familiarity of my old life, the endless spreadsheets and the soul-crushing corporate grind. And yet, there was an unnerving undercurrent. Every pristine surface, every carefully chosen fixture, felt like a silent testament to his presence, a constant whisper of him. I dropped my duffel bag by the door and sank onto the sofa, the plush fabric yielding beneath me. My mind raced, replaying the last few weeks. The frantic packing, the impulsive decision to move, the sheer desperation to escape the inertia of my life. And then the listing for this apartment had appeared, a beacon in the digital storm of my online search. The rent was surprisingly reasonable, the location perfect, and the listing photos had hinted at a certain quality, a certain care that I hadn't found elsewhere. I'd applied immediately, and within days, I'd been approved. The building manager had been vague about the owner. Liam Hayes, a private investor. That's all he'd said. I hadn't pressed. I hadn't wanted to press. But now, standing in the quiet of my new home, the truth felt like a jolt, a tremor running through my carefully constructed composure. He was my landlord. The man I'd shared a night of unadulterated passion with was now in a position of authority over my living space. It was absurd. It was inconvenient. It was terrifyingly exciting. A soft knock at the door made me jump, my heart performing its familiar frantic flamenco against my ribs. I hadn't expected anyone. I scrambled to my feet, smoothing down my jeans, trying to project an air of calm I was far from feeling. Through the peephole I saw him. Liam. He was dressed in dark jeans and a simple gray t-shirt, his dark hair slightly disheveled, as if he'd run a hand through it one too many times. He looked exactly as I remembered him. The same intense gaze, the same subtle curve of his lips that hinted at a wry humor. He was holding a small potted plant, a delicate fern with fronds so green they looked almost unreal. My breath hitched. This was it. The moment of reckoning. The inevitable confrontation with the ghost of that night. I took a deep, steadying breath and opened the door. His eyes met mine, and for a fleeting second, a flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Surprise? Recognition? A shared memory? Then his usual composed mask settled back into place, though his gaze lingered a moment longer than necessary. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice the same low, resonant rumble I remembered. It sent a shiver down my spine. "Welcome to Willow Creek," he gestured with the plant. "A small housewarming gift for your new home." I accepted the fern, my fingers brushing against his. The contact was brief, electric, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken history between us. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," I managed, my voice a little huskier than I intended. "It's lovely." He offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Liam, please. We're not exactly strangers, are we?" The directness of it, the casual dismissal of the awkwardness that was currently suffocating me, was disarming. He was right. We weren't strangers. We were something else entirely. "No," I agreed, stepping back to allow him a better view of the apartment. "We're not." He stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the living room, taking in the unpacked boxes still stacked near the entrance. He moved with a quiet confidence, his presence filling the space without overwhelming it. He wasn't imposing, but there was an undeniable gravity to him, a quiet strength that was both reassuring and intimidating. "It looks good, doesn't it?" he said, gesturing around. "We put a lot of work into these units. Restoring them, bringing them back to life." He paused, his eyes meeting mine again. "I like to think of myself as breathing new life into old things." The double entendre hung in the air, thick and potent. I felt a blush creep up my neck. "It's beautiful, Liam. Truly, I'm so grateful." "You earned it," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "You were quick with the paperwork, and the references were impeccable." He paused, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Though I admit, I was slightly surprised when your application came across my desk. Small world, indeed." "Small world," I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. The understatement was almost comical. He walked over to one of the framed sketches, picking it up. It was a detailed rendering of an old brick building, intricately adorned with ornate carvings. "This is the old library downtown," he explained, his voice softening as he spoke about his work. "I'm hoping to get the bid to restore it. It's a beautiful piece of history, just begging for a second chance." He turned back to me, his expression serious. "I believe in second chances, Miss Vance, in giving things and people the opportunity to be something more than they were. The implication was clear, a silent acknowledgement of the night we'd shared, the unfulfilled promise of that fleeting connection. My heart gave a traitorous leap. This was dangerous territory. I was here to start over, to build a new life, not to rekindle a passionate, improbable fling with my landlord. That's a noble sentiment, I said, trying to keep my voice even. I appreciate that. He placed the sketch back against the wall, his gaze steady on mine. I hope you'll be very happy here, Sarah. He used my first name, and the casual intimacy of it sent another tremor through me. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to call. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, silver business card. My direct line, not the building manager's. I took the card, the cool metal a stark contrast to the warmth of his fingers. Thank you, Liam. He held my gaze for another moment, a silent conversation passing between us, a recognition of the charged atmosphere that now permeated the apartment. Then, with a final nod, he turned and walked towards the door. Enjoy your new beginning, he said, his voice a low murmur. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the quiet, lemon-scented apartment, the fern a vibrant splash of green against the neutral tones, the business card a tangible reminder of the impossible reality. My landlord. The man from the airport lounge. My new beginning, it seemed, was going to be far more complicated and infinitely more interesting than I had ever anticipated. The sterile air of the airport had given way to the scent of lavender and lemon, and the charged anonymity of a hotel room had transformed into the undeniable, nerve-wracking proximity of my new home. This was not how I'd envisioned my fresh start, but as I looked around the beautiful empty space, a defiant spark ignited within me. Maybe, just maybe, this complicated twist of fate was exactly what I needed. The silence that followed Liam's words was a palpable thing, thick with unspoken history. It wasn't just the ambient hum of the city outside or the distant rumble of traffic. It was the weight of that shared night, the electric connection that had flared and burned so brightly in the sterile confines of the airport lounge and the anonymity of a hotel room. Now, that same charged atmosphere was seeping into the very walls of my new apartment, turning what was supposed to be a fresh start into a dizzying, almost surreal reunion. My carefully constructed fantasy of a quiet, independent life, punctuated only by the scent of old paper and the murmur of satisfied customers in my future bookstore, had just imploded. And standing in the doorway, holding a bottle of what looked like artisanal olive oil, was the architect of its demolition. Liam. My landlord. The man who knew the raw, vulnerable parts of me that I'd thought I'd shed like a discarded boarding pass. He offered a small, almost imperceptible smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes, but held a wealth of understanding. I hope this is a good start, he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated somewhere deep in my chest. It was the same voice that had whispered secrets in the dark, the same voice that had held me close. I managed to nod, my throat suddenly tight. My mind, usually a well-organized filing cabinet of thoughts and to-do lists, was a chaotic jumble of flashing images. The flickering fluorescent lights of the lounge, the cool cotton sheets of the hotel, the determined set of his jaw as he'd sketched on a napkin, the way his hand had felt against my skin. It's unexpected, I managed, the word sounding ridiculously inadequate. Unexpected was like calling a hurricane a mild breeze. He stepped further into the apartment, his gaze sweeping over the unpacked boxes, the bare walls, the stark, impersonal furniture I'd hastily acquired. It was a stark contrast to the meticulous order he seemed to exude, the understated elegance that was as much a part of him as his architectural precision. "I know," he said, his eyes meeting mine. There was a flicker of something in their depths. Amusement, perhaps, or a shared acknowledgement of the absurdity of it all. "I'm glad you chose this building, though. It's a good one. Solid." The double meaning wasn't lost on me. Solid. Like the foundation of a building, or the foundation of a relationship. I felt a blush creep up my neck. "Thank you," I murmured, accepting the bottle of olive oil. It was heavy, cool in my hands. The label was simple, elegant, hinting at a life lived with intention, a far cry from the hurried, transactional nature of our first meeting. For the gift, and for everything. He inclined his head, a gesture of polite acknowledgement that felt both familiar and entirely new in this context. "It's my pleasure. I like to welcome new tenants personally, make sure they have everything they need." His gaze lingered on me for a beat longer than necessary, and the air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with that same potent cocktail of jet fuel and desperation that had drawn us together in the first place. "Well, I think I have most things," I said, gesturing vaguely at the chaos. "Just a few more boxes to conquer." "I understand," he replied. "Moving is always a battle, but this place has good bones. It's a blank canvas, really. Ready for you to make it your own." He paused, then added, his voice softer. "Just like, well, you know." My breath hitched. He knew, of course he knew. He was an architect. He saw structures, blueprints, the potential within raw materials, and he had seen me, stripped bare of pretense in a liminal space between flights, and apparently, he saw something worth building on. "Right," I said, my voice a little too high. "A blank canvas." I needed to regain some semblance of control, to put some distance, however artificial, between the passionate stranger and the professional landlord. "So, if you have the lease agreement for me to sign, or any other paperwork..." He produced a neat, bound document from his jacket pocket. "Just a few formalities. I thought I'd bring it over now since I was already here." He handed it to me, and I took it with hands that felt strangely unsteady. The paper was crisp, official, a stark contrast to the impulsive, exhilarating mess of the night we'd met. As I scanned the clauses, my mind raced. How was I supposed to function as a tenant, paying rent and adhering to building rules, when my landlord was the man who had held me so completely, who had seen the parts of me I kept hidden even from myself? Every interaction, every polite inquiry about a leaky faucet or a noisy neighbor would be laced with the memory of tangled sheets and whispered confessions. He watched me, his expression unreadable. I wondered what he was thinking. Was he regretting this? Was he curious, or was he, like me, caught in a strange eddy of fate, wondering if this was a second chance or simply a cosmic joke? "Everything seems to be in order," I said, finally looking up from the pages. My gaze met his, and for a fleeting moment, the professional facade chipped away, revealing the man I'd shared a night with. His eyes were a deep, intelligent blue, and they held a warmth that belied his composed exterior. "Good," he said, a faint smile returning. "I'm glad. And if you need anything at all, don't hesitate to ask. That's what I'm here for." He didn't elaborate, but the implication hung in the air. Anything. At all. I nodded, my heart performing a frantic flamenco against my ribs once more. "I won't," I promised, and I meant it. The thought of needing him, of having a legitimate reason to interact with him, was both terrifying and exhilarating. He turned to leave, pausing at the threshold. "Barcelona was the plan, wasn't it?" he asked, his voice casual. Yet I knew he was referring to the cancelled flight, the catalyst for our unexpected encounter. A wave of melancholy washed over me. a ghost of the disappointment I'd felt that day. It was, I admitted. But I think I'm starting to realize that some detours can lead to interesting destinations. He gave me a slow, knowing smile. Indeed, they can. And with that, he was gone, leaving me standing in the middle of my new apartment, the lease agreement clutched in my hand, the scent of olive oil and something far more intoxicating lingering in the air. My fresh start had just become infinitely more complicated and undeniably, irrevocably, more interesting. The corporate grind and suffocating familiarity felt a million miles away, replaced by the immediate pressing reality of an undeniable connection with the man who now held the keys to my new home. The following days were a blur of unpacking and trying to re-establish a semblance of normalcy. I'd catch myself staring at the door, half expecting Liam to reappear, not as a landlord, but as the stranger from the airport. Every creak of the building, every distant footstep in the hallway sent a tremor of anticipation through me. I'd replay snippets of our conversation, dissecting his words, his expressions, searching for clues to his thoughts, his intentions. He didn't appear again for another week. My relief was mixed with a strange disappointment. I'd convinced myself that our encounter was a fluke, a momentary lapse in judgment fueled by shared frustration and the potent anonymity of travel. Now his absence felt like a deliberate erasure, a professional courtesy that stung more than I cared to admit. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, as I was wrestling a particularly stubborn box of books, there was a soft, percussive knock on my door. My heart leaped. I smoothed down my t-shirt, took a deep breath, and opened it. Liam stood there, looking as impeccably put together as ever, though this time he was holding a small potted plant, a vibrant green peace lily. "Hello again?" he said, his smile a little warmer this time, a little less guarded. "Just checking in, making sure you haven't been buried alive by your books." I couldn't help but laugh, a genuine unforced sound that surprised even me. "Not yet, but it's a close call. Come in." He stepped inside, his presence immediately filling the space, making it feel less like a collection of boxes and more like a home. He placed the peace lily on the windowsill, its clean lines a pleasing contrast to the clutter. "Barcelona," he said, gesturing to a particularly large box overflowing with novels. "I remember you were heading there." "I was," I confirmed, leaning against a stack of boxes. "But life, as it often does, had other plans." "It does," he agreed, his gaze sweeping over the room again. "This is good, though. Starting your own place. And I heard you're opening a bookstore?" My eyes widened. "How did you know that?" He shrugged, a casual gesture that didn't quite conceal the thoughtful observer beneath. "A little bird told me. Or, rather, the building manager mentioned you'd been asking about the small commercial space on the ground floor. Is that right?" I felt a surge of pride. "Yes. It's the dream. A used bookstore. Cozy chairs, good coffee, the smell of old paper. Sounds idyllic," he said, his tone sincere. "I can see you here. Curating stories." We talked for another hour, the conversation flowing with an ease that was both comforting and unnerving. He asked about my favorite authors, the kinds of books I planned to stock, my vision for the store. I, in turn, asked about his work, his passion for restoring old buildings, his travels. He spoke with a quiet enthusiasm that was captivating, his eyes lighting up when he described the intricate details of a facade or the challenge of bringing a historic structure back to life. There were moments, brief but potent, when the professional veneer would crack, and I'd catch a glimpse of the man from the airport lounge, a shared glance that held a flicker of recognition, a subtle shift in his posture, a deeper resonance in his voice. We commiserated about the trials of travel, the unexpected inconveniences, the way life could throw curveballs when you least expected them. "It's funny, isn't it?" I said, a wry smile playing on my lips. Two strangers, stuck in an airport, sharing our deepest desires and regrets. And then, this. I gestured between us, encompassing the apartment, the building, the peculiar twist of fate that had brought us together again. Liam met my gaze, his expression thoughtful. "I don't believe in coincidences, not entirely," he said, his voice low. "Sometimes, the universe just nudges you in a certain direction." "A nudge?" I echoed, a shiver running down my spine. It felt more like a shove. "Or a redirection," he amended, his eyes holding mine. "Perhaps it's an opportunity to see things differently, to build something more substantial." The implication hung heavy in the air between us, a palpable promise, a silent question. The peace lily on the windowsill seemed to absorb the tension, its leaves a deep, calming green. "Substantial," I repeated, the word tasting foreign and exciting on my tongue. My life had been about carefully constructed plans, about predictable outcomes. But Liam, with his quiet confidence and his uncanny ability to see the potential in both buildings and people, was challenging all of that. He was a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary things emerge from the most unexpected detours. As he finally stood to leave, he paused at the door, not with the polite formality of a landlord, but with a lingering warmth. "I'm glad you're here," he said, his gaze direct. "Really glad." And in that moment, standing in the semi-unpacked chaos of my new apartment, with the scent of old books and new beginnings mingling with the subtle, lingering aroma of his cologne, I knew that my fresh start was going to be anything but ordinary. The man who owned my building was the man who had once owned my night. And the thought was both terrifying and undeniably thrilling. The foundation of my new life was being laid, and I had a sneaking suspicion that Liam was going to be a very integral part of its structure. The key to my new apartment felt impossibly heavy in my hand, a small, metallic omen. It was a decidedly unglamorous key, the kind that promised chipped paint and the faint, lingering scent of other people's lives. But it was mine. Or rather, it was mine to rent. And the owner, the man who held the ultimate say over whether I could inhabit this small corner of the world, was Liam. Liam, who smelled faintly of expensive cologne and the lingering electricity of our shared, almost surreal night in the airport lounge. Liam, whose hands had traced the curve of my hip with a tenderness that still sent tremors through me. I'd secured the apartment in a fit of post-Liam delirium, a desperate need to anchor myself after being so thoroughly untethered. My old place had been a monument to my thwarted plans, a place I'd been meaning to leave for months. The idea of a fresh start, a blank slate, had been intoxicating. I'd stumbled upon the listing online, a charming pre-war building with high ceilings and the promise of character. The landlord's name had been listed as L. Sterling. At the time, it had registered as a faint echo, a whisper of familiarity I'd dismissed as the exhaustion of travel and champagne. Now, standing on the stoop, the key cold against my palm, the echo had become a deafening roar. The building itself was a study in understated elegance, the kind of place that whispered history rather than shouted it. The entryway was paved with mosaic tiles, worn smooth by generations of footsteps. A grand, dark wood staircase curved upwards, its banister polished to a soft sheen. It was a far cry from the sterile, recycled air of the international terminal, a place where my life had felt as temporary and transient as the passengers around me. Here, there was a solidity, a permanence that was both comforting and terrifying. My apartment, thankfully, was on the 3rd floor. I'd opted for the smallest unit, A cozy one-bedroom with a surprisingly generous living area, and a kitchen that, while compact, boasted a gleaming new gas range. The windows overlooked a tree-lined street, the leaves a vibrant green even in the late afternoon sun. It was perfect. It was exactly what I'd been dreaming of. And it was owned by him. The first few days were a blur of unpacking boxes, the percussive thud of tape guns, and the quiet hum of a new refrigerator. I tried to push Liam to the periphery of my thoughts, to relegate our airport encounter to a fantastical dream, a potent cocktail of jet fuel and desperation. But every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren, every whisper of wind against the glass seemed to conjure his image, his voice, the ghost of his touch. I'd received a terse email a few days after I moved in, confirming my lease and providing a contact number for any building-related issues. It was signed Liam Sterling. No pleasantries, no mention of our shared history, just business. It was a stark reminder of the chasm between the man who had held me so fiercely in a hotel room and the landlord who now held the keys to my new life. Then, on a Tuesday morning, the universe decided to throw another wrench into my carefully constructed narrative. I was wrestling a particularly stubborn box of books down the hallway, my hair askew and my face probably smudged with dust, when I heard the heavy tread of footsteps on the stairs. I froze, the box threatening to slip from my grasp. He rounded the corner, dressed in dark jeans and a crisp, pale blue button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He was carrying a small toolbox, his brow furrowed in concentration. He stopped, his eyes widening slightly in surprise, then a flicker of something unreadable that I couldn't quite decipher. "Oh," he said, his voice a low rumble that sent a familiar shiver down my spine. "Hello?" My heart performed a frantic flamenco against my ribs. "Liam?" I managed, my voice a little breathy. "Hi." He set down the toolbox, his gaze sweeping over me, lingering on my disheveled appearance for a beat longer than strictly necessary. "Moving in, I see," he stated, his tone neutral, almost detached. "Just finished, mostly," I said, trying to sound nonchalant, as if the fact that he was here, in my building, wasn't currently making my knees feel like overcooked spaghetti. "It's a great building. Really love it." A faint smile touched his lips, a fleeting, almost imperceptible thing. "Glad to hear it. I put a lot of work into it." He gestured vaguely with his chin. "Just checking on a leaky faucet on the second floor. Nothing urgent." The silence that stretched between us was thick with unspoken history, with the memory of bare skin and whispered confessions. It was charged, humming with an energy that felt both exhilarating and deeply unnerving. I wanted to ask him about Barcelona, about Tokyo, about the impossibly potent connection we'd forged in that liminal space between flights. But the words felt too heavy, too loaded. "Right," I said, clutching the box tighter. "Well, I'll just get these downstairs." He nodded, his eyes holding mine for a moment longer. "If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to ask." His gaze drifted down to my hands, then back up to my face. "Though I suppose you already know that." The implication hung in the air, a private joke shared between two strangers who had, for one night, been far more than that. I felt a blush creep up my neck. "Right," I repeated, a little weakly. As I maneuvered the box past him, I caught the subtle scent of him, that same intoxicating blend of cologne, and something uniquely him, something that spoke of quiet confidence and a certain understated elegance. It was a scent that had been burned into my memory. And now, it was the scent of my landlord. The rest of the week was a strange dance of avoidance and accidental encounters. I'd hear him in the hallways, his footsteps a familiar rhythm against the polished wood. I'd see him through the peephole, his silhouette framed against the hallway light, and I'd hesitate before opening the door. The landlord-tenant dynamic felt like a flimsy shield, a carefully constructed barrier against the raw vulnerability we'd shared. One evening, I was struggling to open a stubborn jar of pickles, my frustration mounting with each failed attempt. I was about to give up, to resign myself to a pickleless existence, when a soft knock sounded at my door. I opened it to find Liam, holding a small ornate bottle opener. Heard some strenuous